We come together this morning to remind one another to rest for a moment on the forming edge of our lives, to resist for the headlong tumble into the next moment, until we claim for ourselves awareness and gratitude, taking the time to look into one another's eyes and another's faces and see there communion, the reflection of our own eyes. This house of laughter and silence, memory and hope, is hallowed by our presence together. As is our custom, if you'd like to come and light a candle for whatever personal or private reason, please do so while we sit in stillness listening to the prelude. Please stand in body or spirit for our chalice lighting and spoken affirmation. Albert Schweitzer gives us the words for our chalice lighting. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. Join me as together we remind ourselves of the affirmation that is the cornerstone of our free faith tradition. The words, should you need them, are in the morning program. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another.
Good morning. Today is our second Sunday, continuing our look at Great Peacemakers, true stories from around the world. We are sure most of you have heard of one of the two individuals we'll talk about today, Martin Luther King Jr. The second person is Anderson Saw. If you're like us, Saw will come as a pleasant surprise. We hope you enjoy learning more about these leaders this morning. Much of the dialogue about the leaders is taken directly from the book, Great Peacemakers, True Stories from Around the World. For our practices, 44 William Henry Channing. This is the reading from the practice. To live content with small means, to seek elegance rather than luxury, and refinement rather than fashion. To be worthy, not respectable, and wealthy, not rich. To study hard, think quietly, talk gently, act frankly. To listen to stars and birds, to babes and sages, with open heart, to bear all cheerfully. Do all bravely, await occasions, never hurry. To let the spiritual, unbidden, and unconscious grow up through the common. This is to be my symphony. Join me in a minute of silence to contemplate these words.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is famous for having a dream for all people to be free, to respect each other's rights, and live together in peace and brotherhood. King's words stirred the nation's conscience and changed America forever. Although the life of this young Nobel laureate was tragically cut short, his dream remains and continues to inspire millions of people today. Martin Luther King Jr. was born to a prominent Baptist minister and his wife in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Growing up in the South, King became increasingly aware of the injustice that was taking place in the American South, a land divided by segregation. Under segregation, blacks were not recognized as full citizens and usually had to attend separate schools, eat in separate restaurants, and use separate drinking fountains. Making matters worse, blacks frequently suffered insults, beatings, and even killings from racist whites. King was a bright student, and at the age of 15, he entered Morehouse College, where he learned of nonviolent resistance by reading Henry David Thoreau's essay, Civil Disobedience, and studying great thinkers, including Mahatma Gandhi. After graduation, King entered Boston University's School of Theology and met singer and peace activist Coretta Scott, who became his wife and the mother of their 4 children. King extolled, "She was the one who gave meaning to my life." After receiving a PhD in systemic theology, King and his wife decided they could be of more service to humanity if they moved back to Montgomery, Alabama to begin their ministry. The first major protest the Kings experienced against segregation was the Montgomery bus boycott, where in 1955, a black woman named Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to relinquish her seat on the bus to a white man. This prompted black citizens to form the Montgomery Improvement Association and elect King as its president. And that started one of the most influential boycotts in the American history. The goal of the boycott being to put justice in business. For 381 days, Montgomery's black citizens walked and carpooled rather than ride segregated buses. During the boycott, King's house was bombed. While many would have retaliated with violence, King insisted on nonviolence because violence would only breed more hate. King believed nonviolence means avoiding not only external physical violence, but also internal violence of the spirit. You not only refuse to shoot a man, but you refuse to hate him. He counseled his followers, "We must use the weapon of love. We must have compassion and understanding for those who hate us. We must realize so many people are taught to hate us that they are not totally responsible for their hate." King joyfully rode Montgomery's first integrated bus on December 21st, 1956, after the U.S. Supreme Court declared bus segregation laws unconstitutional. This victory proved that nonviolent resistance could be an effective tool for social change in America. Following this success, King co-founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, called the SCLC, and was elected as its first president. The media spotlighted him as a symbol of the civil rights movement. Fame, however, brought its own difficulties and dangers. King admitted, "Frankly, I'm worried to death. A man who hits his peak at 27 has a tough job ahead. People will be expecting me to pull rabbits out of the hat for the rest of my life." Dangers showed up while he was autographing his first book, Stride Toward Freedom, The Montgomery Story. A mentally disturbed black woman stabbed him in the chest with a letter opener. The blade landed so close to his heart that if he had sneezed, he would be dead. He would have died. Following recovery, the Kings moved to Atlanta, where King became co-pastor with his father at Ebenezer Baptist Church and continued his work with the SCLC. In this role, King led many nonviolent campaigns against social justice. One of the most challenging campaigns began in 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama, which King called the most segregated city in America. When King and fellow protesters marched in Birmingham, the police commissioner's men attacked them with clubs, police dogs, and fire hoses that were so strong they were strong enough to rip the bark from trees and hurl grown men against buildings. Even so, King and other leaders convinced demonstrators not to retaliate with violence or weapons. During this campaign, King was jailed and his hotel room was bombed, setting off riots and bringing 3,000 federal troops to Birmingham. In May of 1963, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled the commissioner and his men out of office, marking a significant victory in civil rights. Continuing his civil rights campaign 3 months later, King traveled to Washington, D.C. There, more than 200,000 people, both black and white, gathered before the Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and experienced King at his finest. His sonorous voice resounded, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today." King's address that day became one of the most famous speeches in American history. Unfortunately, though, at the time, not everyone shared his dream. In the following months, 4 black girls were killed in a church bombing in Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama, and 4 blacks were beaten unconscious by members of the Ku Klux Klan in St. Augustine, Florida. This violence ignited protests until President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed discrimination and segregation on the grounds of race, color, religion, or national origin. Later in 1964, King became the youngest individual ever to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Struggling to suppress tears, the 35-year-old leader accepted the prize on behalf of all who love peace and brotherhood. Less than 2 months later, the Nobel laureate was jailed again after participating in a voting rights march in Selma, Alabama. When released, King led thousands of protesters, both black and white, on a 50-mile march from Selma to Montgomery. King told marchers, "If you can't accept blows without retaliating, don't get in the line. If you can accept it out of your commitment to nonviolence, you will somehow do something for this nation that may well save it." Indeed, the march hastened President Johnson's signing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Consistent with his belief in nonviolence, King opposed the war in Vietnam, asserting, "I would not fight in the war in Vietnam. I'd go to jail before I'd do it. I'm not going to continue to say to young men that if you feel it in your heart that this war is wrong, unjust, and objectionable, don't go in and fight it." Widespread criticism followed from the media and some of King's own supporters. Although sometimes feeling discouraged and that his work was in vain, King continued to press forward. After the launch of SCLC's Poor People's Campaign, King supported striking sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. There he delivered what would be his final address. King said, Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. The next day, excuse me, the next day, April 1968, as King stood on the balcony of his hotel room, he was struck down by a gunshot to the neck at the age of 39. The bullet that pierced King's neck also pierced America's heart. But his dream lives on. It lives on in all who dare to dream of a more equitable world. It lives on in all who practice the power of nonviolence. It lives on in all who believe with him that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. We will now see a few of King's more famous quotes, followed by a song.
Sing about Martin.
Sing about Martin.
Sing about caring.
Sing about caring.
Sing about peace.
Sing about peace.
All around the world.
All around the world.
Sing about Martin.
Sing about Martin.
Sing about loving.
Sing about loving.
Sing about peace.
Sing about peace.
All around the world.
All around the world.
Sing about Martin.
Sing about Martin.
Sing about caring.
Sing about caring.
Sing about peace.
Sing about peace.
All around the world.
All around the world.
Sing about Martin.
Sing about Martin.
Sing about loving.
Sing about loving.
Sing about peace.
Sing about peace.
All around the world.
All around the world.
By his 12th year, Brazilian musician Anderson Saw. This is about Anderson Saw, an instrument of change. By his 12th year, Brazilian musician Anderson had witnessed murder and also participated in drug trafficking. When a tragic massacre in his community killed his brother, Saw realized that his life had to change. Seeking to give young people a creative and fun alternative to violence, he helped create the band Afro Reggae. As its lead singer, Saw has been the subject of an award-winning documentary film, and we'll see the trailer after this, and has played one of the largest concerts in history and inspires at-risk youth to choose nonviolence. It started in 1979 when Anderson Saw was born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. With its picturesque harbor and sparkling beaches, Rio is one of the world's most beautiful cities. Sadly, it's also one of its most violent. To put Rio's violence into perspective, between 1987 and 2001, approximately 500 minors were murdered in Israel and Palestine combined. In Rio, the number was nearly 4,000. 4,000 minors murdered in the same time period. Most of those minors were dying in the city's roughly 600 favelas, and those are shanty towns. Considered by city officials to be illegal squatter settlements, favelas lack basic services. The streets aren't paved, the sewer and electricity systems are substandard if they even exist, and schools, where they exist, rarely go beyond elementary school. Hoping to improve their standard of living, many favela youth join so-called drug armies. They join the drug armies in their areas that frequently clash with the often corrupt military police. One favela, called Vigario Geral, was especially violent in the early 1980s. It was there that Anderson Saw was born and raised, recalling, instead of falling asleep with our mothers singing to us, we fell asleep to gunshots and people screaming. We fell asleep to the sounds of violence. At age 10, Saw was walking with his mother along the street with his mother when they witnessed a man being beaten and shot repeatedly in the street. Already somewhat desensitized to violence, Saw simply thought, at age 10, I'm not afraid of dying. Like many favela children, Saw perceived only one source of structure, status, and camaraderie in the favela, and that was the drug army. And he believed that there were only two options in life. You're either going to become a laborer earning US $13 or a week, $13 a week, or become a drug trafficker and earn $650 a week. Although he was aware that most drug traffickers were killed before the age of 25, Saw was drawn into the second option of becoming a drug trafficker, remembering, I got involved with a crime organization indirectly. I buried weapons, packaged drugs, little favors here and there. Eventually, he said, I would witness murders, tortures. I was hanging out with criminals. He was only 12 years old at that time. Then came the Vigario Geral massacre. One day in 1993, a drug trafficker in Vigario Geral killed 4 police officers, and in retaliation, the next night, the police officers came back and killed 21 unarmed residents. None of them were even connected to the drug trafficking, and one of them was Saw's brother. Instead of immediately seeking revenge, Saw took time to reflect on the tragedy and wondered, why do people want to kill each other? And why is there so much hatred? Ultimately, he asked himself, how do I end the violence? An answer emerged when, sad and angry about the massacre, he wrote a song called Tu Bolado, which translates to, I'm overwhelmed. And he started to think about using music as an instrument of change. The first thing he did was he decided to change his own life by getting out of drug trafficking and looking for alternatives to violence. Another young man at the same time, Jose Jr., was also exploring alternatives to violence and began publishing Afro Reggae News, which discussed popular music and profiled nonviolent role models such as Jamaican singer Bob Marley and American civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. The newsletter caught on, but its success was limited because very few favela residents could even read. So Saw and Junior decided to reach out to them directly through music. Saw explained, music plays a very important role. Who doesn't listen to music? Who doesn't identify himself or themselves with music? Drawing on this universal appeal, they recruited volunteers to give drumming lessons to the local youth, who made the most of their limited resources and tapped out rhythms on old oil cans and plastic jugs. Excited by these sessions, some participants formed a band called Afro Reggae, and Saw became its lead singer. The band mixed reggae, hip-hop, funk, rap, and samba rhythms to bold lyrics that denounced violence. Energized by Afro Reggae's free concerts, infectious beats, and charismatic lead vocalist, more and more young people joined the drumming lessons. Saw described, in a way, Afro Reggae consciously mimics the organization of the drug traffic. Our clothes, our structure, even our slang, because we want to mirror what attracts young people. But of course, we try to show that when you make money and attain power through other means, through your creative abilities, that's what they want to do. Another way in which the band differed from the drug army was that Afro Reggae participants were forbidden from drinking, smoking, or taking drugs. Nonetheless, young people came to the lessons in droves, and one of them pointed out, there have been other projects in the favela, but there's never been anything like Afro Reggae, which is actually fun. Soon, Afro Reggae was no longer just a band, it was a movement. Under Jose Jr.'s skillful direction, the nonprofit group Grupo Cultural Afro Reggae was established and built a community center. There, other bands formed, other programs were offered, including music and dance and soccer for children and teens. They offered literacy and socialization for toddlers, and child rearing skills and domestic violence prevention for parents. The movement even received praise from an unlikely source, a drug lord. Saw marveled, all we do is directly against everything that the drug army is. Our mission is to take youth out of the drug army, yet this drug lord thanked us for the work we're doing. In time, Afro Reggae was performing professional quality concerts in other favelas, attracting up to 50,000 spectators and receiving grants from large U.S. foundations. In a major milestone, in 2001, Afro Reggae signed a contract with Universal Records to release an album, Nova Cara, which means new face. You can find that on Spotify. I was listening to it on the way up here. It's really dynamic, really inspirational, great music. I definitely recommend it. And that album marked the first time in Brazil's history that a band from a social project made its first album with such a large recording company. But there's always a but. Just when Afro Reggae was enjoying such great momentum, a really shocking accident occurred. One morning, for some solitude, Saw was enjoying surfing alone, which he usually did around before 5 a.m., and then he went back to the Vagaro. But one morning in 2003, he did not return and was later found floating unconscious in the water, apparently having hit his head on a rock. At the hospital, it was discovered that a vertebra in Saw's neck had been broken, and at age 22, he was paralyzed. Surgery might repair some of the damage, but neither Saw nor Afro Reggae had the money to pay for it. Knowing that Saw represented hope to so many favela residents, a surgeon named Dr. Apollo Niemeyer offered to operate free of charge, but he cautioned, even with surgery, very few patients with such a severe injury ever walked again. After the operation, Saw awoke with a stiff brace around his neck and a circle of worried friends at his bedside. He reflected, "This is the thing I was most afraid of, paralysis and immobility. I think the favelas can relate. They've been through this pain. It's as if the spinal cord of the favela has always been broken." Later, when the doctor asked if Saw could move his hand at all, Saw doubted that he could, but he tried anyways, and astonishingly, his hand moved. Little by little, he discovered that he actually could move other parts of his body. 4 days after surgery, he slowly stood up and walked out of the hospital. After 10 months of rehabilitation in 2004, Saw was back on stage singing and dancing and telling fans, "Now, all the favelas must start to move for the first time. We must all begin to show that we are able, that we can lift our own arms, we can raise our heads." Afro Reggae's momentum resumed, and the band performed at New York's Carnegie Hall. In 2005, it released its second album, which translates to "Nothing Justifies War." The same year, a film about Saw called Favela Rising was named Film of the Year by the International Documentary Association. The next year, Afro Reggae opened for the Rolling Stones at Rio's Copacabana Beach with 1.5 million people there, one of the largest concerts in history. During a subsequent tour of the UK, Afro Reggae joined Make Some Noise, a program supporting efforts by Amnesty International, Oxfam, and other organizations to reduce gun violence worldwide. Today in Vigario Geral, Afro Reggae's effect on the community is still measurable. As of the writing of this book, 150 teens earn enough money by just participating with Afro Reggae. They are actually the top earners in their families. Now, the number of known drug dealers has dropped from 150 before Afro Reggae began to less than 20, and none of those 20 are local. Further, the movement has expanded to at least 9 other favelas, which are being filled less with the noise of gunfire and more with the rhythm of music. Thanks in large part to Anderson Saw, who found his voice and became a powerful instrument of change, the Afro Reggae movement has created a viable alternative to drugs and violence for thousands of young people. Attesting to the impact of this movement, one of the participants said, "We're born in a cradle of crime. If Afro Reggae hadn't been there, I'll be honest with you, none of us would be alive right now. That's just realistic." We will now watch a trailer for the documentary, followed by some of the words of Saw. A short clip of an Afro Reggae concert is next. Anderson Saw is the first singer, but the others from the group are also featured.
Vigário Geral é uma das mais de 600 favelas do Rio de Janeiro. Uma favela que foi considerada a Bósnia brasileira. Aqui fui nascido e criado. Enquanto as crianças que moram fora da comunidade eram embaladas, elas dormiam com cantigas de niná, nós, quando éramos pequenos, dormíamos ao som de tiro, ao som das pessoas gritando, ao som da violência.
Infelizmente, o Anderson perdeu o irmão dele.
Por que eles querem se matar? Por que dessa violência, esse ódio? E se pensa, né, como combater essa violência? E fui começando a prestar atenção, usar a música, a cultura como instrumento da mudança. a reggae com tráfico, ela sempre houve, mas de cada um jovem que a gente tirava, tinha 3, 5 esperando. Pra gente era legal, porque a gente pelo menos tinha tirado uns, mas...
Vem, DJ! Yeah! E aí, você? Vem! Eu quero regenerar! Me diga! E quando eu digo afro, vocês dizem reggae, eu digo afro! Afro! E quando eu digo afro, vocês dizem reggae, eu digo afro! Afro! E quando eu digo afro, vocês digam reggae, eu digo afro! Afro! E quando eu digo afro, vocês dizem reggae, eu digo afro! Afro!
Vamos fazer barulho aí, todo mundo aí, vamos pra cima!
Os irmãos convida a pulsação dá o compasso. Venha com estilo e domine seu espaço. Não tem dia, não tem hora, em qualquer lugar. Na rua, nas esquinas, você quem faz o clima ativo. É o nosso instinto, atrai a multidão. Melodia e poesia é coisa de negão. Delícia é seu tempo, deixa ele passar. Se jogue para dentro e vamos celebrar. Delícia é seu tempo, deixa ele passar. Se jogue para dentro e vamos celebrar.
Se você gosta de dançar, escute o som do bom e vem se balançar.
Vem se balançar, vem se balançar.
Se você gosta de dançar, escute o som do bom e vem se balançar.
Vem!
Batendo no seu peito, amando essa energia, nosso som não tem fronteira, vamos nem limite. O que passou, passou, deixa isso pra lá, conexão de nem limite, sabe? Licença ao tempo, deixa ele passar, se jogue para dentro, vamos celebrar. Licença ao tempo, deixa ele passar, se jogue para dentro, vamos celebrar. Todo mundo joga a mão pro alto aí pra celebrar. Celebrar, maravilha, vamos celebrar. Se você gosta de dançar, escute o som do bom e vem se balançar.
Vem se balançar, vem se balançar.
Se você gosta de dançar, escute o som do bom e vem se balançar. Ordena-nos da vida a pulsação dá um compasso. Venha com estilo e domine seu espaço.
Não tem dia, não tem hora, em qualquer lugar.
Na rua, nas esquinas,
Você quem faz o clima,
ativa nosso
atrai a multidão.
instinto. Melodia e poesia.
É coisa de negão.
Boca de negão, boca de negão.
Dê licença ao tempo,
Deixa ele passar.
Se jogue para dentro e vamos celebrar. Dê licença ao tempo, deixa ele passar. Se jogue para dentro e vamos celebrar.
Se você gosta de dançar, escute o som do bom e vem se balançar.
Vem se balançar, vem se balançar.
Se você gosta de dançar, escute o som do bom e vem se balançar.
É som do bom, som do bom.
Yeah. Se você quer se balançar,
Som do bom, som do bom.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Marca no peito e emanece energia. O que passou, passou, deixou lá. Desambre e Oxalá.
Freely have we received of gifts that minister to our needs of body and spirit. Gladly we bring to our church in its wide concerns a portion of this bounty. The bowl awaits, or you may donate online. I invite you to stand in body or spirit for the benediction and extinguishing the chalice. Following the extinguishing of the chalice, I invite you to sit for just one more minute for our postlude. Deep peace of the running wave to you. Deep peace of the flowing air to you. Deep peace of the quiet earth to you. Deep peace of the shining stars to you. Deep peace of the infinite peace to you. Please join me in saying the words to extinguish our chalice. The words, should you need them, are in the morning program. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.